I invite the librarian, Genevieve Athis, Christchurch, to open the case for the proposition on the motion, this House believes private schools are a public disaster.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, every single government since 1945 has placed education at the centre of their mission. If we capitalised on higher education, we were told by Gordon Brown, Britain would realise its full potential. Education, we were told by Margaret Thatcher, was the key to a free and prosperous Britain. Education, we were told by Tony Blair, well, education, education, education. In this nation, we have made major advances in terms of the welfare state. Today, we are able to provide healthcare for all, free at the point of use. Today, everyone is entitled to a state pension, a guarantee on the dignity of their old age. And today, unemployment no longer brings with it the fear of starvation. And we should be proud of our successes. But we should not let this success obscure the fact that when our government has set its sights on education, it has failed. And it has failed time and time again.
On a point of information.
No, thank you. When it comes to our schools and the opportunities that we ourselves will offer to the next generation, it is not pride we should feel, but shame. For unlike in the fields of healthcare, pensions, and of benefits, when it comes to education, we have achieved no fundamental change. Now, the opposition tonight will tell you that these shortcomings in education are not the fault of private schools, but of the state. The opposition tonight will tell you that it's all the government's fault, and that in theory, a two-tiered system of education could be good for everyone. But ladies and gentlemen, please do not be deceived by this utopian vision, but instead, look to the hard truth, that while the rich can buy their children a better start in life, state schools will always be inherently limited, unable to provide the same opportunities for their students. So what is it about Eton, Harrow, Westminster, that gives their students such a head start in life? I don't think it's just the grades. Today, many grammar schools outperform... I don't think it's just the grades. Today, many grammar schools outperform private schools. Yet, faced with a choice, and despite the sizable fees, many parents still opt for the private school. It is something you can't quite put your finger on. A sense of entitlement, or perhaps, more charitably, an air of confidence. The belief that they will be a success, no matter what life can throw at them. Now tonight I want to talk to you about three things. First, I want to show you that your education doesn't stop when you're 18, and how the culture of private schools permeates the most important institutions in our society. Secondly, I'm going to show you how the clever public relations tactics of private schools actually masks and exacerbates many of the issues in the present system of education. And finally, I want to consider the real impact of the disconnect within society created by our current educational system and argue that it truly does constitute a very public disaster. But before I continue with my argument tonight, it falls on me to introduce the opposition for tonight's debate. Speaking first is Nick Brown, a second-year PPist at Magdalen College. I've known Nick for a little while now, and I've got to know his likes and his dislikes. He likes reading out the cocktails painfully slowly. He likes private schools, and if you've read the news recently, you may have seen that he also loves political opportunism. Next up is Barnaby Lennon. Mr. Lennon is the former headmaster at Harrow and the chairman of the Independent Schools Council, but is surely best known for his rogue 2010 appearance in Celebrity MasterChef. I just hope the fame hasn't gone to his head. Next up is Ben Quinney. Mr. Quinney is the chairman of the Bow Group, the United Kingdom's oldest conservative think tank. A quick Google search showed me that Mr. Quinney had the privilege of visiting the Cambridge Union last week. I would like to congratulate him on what is certainly an upgrade. And closing the case for the opposition tonight is Alexandra Galloway, a second-year law student also at Magdalen College. Alexandra is an ex-returning officer for the Oxford Union, and as she'll be overseeing the elections next week, I was not originally going to make any jokes about her. But this was before Alexandra's guest kindly informed me at dinner that her school was so private, it was actually called Dollar Academy. Mr. President, these are your guests, and they are most welcome. Tonight's motion places a heavy burden on the proposition. It does not just require us to show that private schools are unfair, or socially divisive, or that they should not receive charitable status. Proposition tonight must show that private schools are a public disaster. We must show that their unfairness, the social division which they foster, hurts society at large. For too long, discussions of the merits and failures of private education has served as a proxy for an issue about which the British are particularly shy. And that is the issue of class. Private schools, we are told, are unjust because they maintain class division. And quietly, awkwardly, both sides agree to leave the argument there. About class, they seem to say, there can be no rational argument. Now, tonight I will not take this approach. Tonight I want to show you that the impact of private schools is of a very public nature, and that it is not just to do with class. It fails every rung of society, from the rich to the poor, and from the able to the disabled. If you attend a private school, you are 55 times more likely to go to Oxford than a pupil at a state school on free school meals. That was once me. And I believe that proposition and opposition and the audience tonight will all agree that this is fundamentally unfair. Private school students are not 55 times naturally more intelligent, or 55 times naturally more hardworking, or 55 times more deserving. Yet, when these students do turn up to their first days, their freshers' weeks, at universities across the nation, at Oxford, and at Cambridge, it becomes immediately clear that the impact of your secondary education does not end when you turn 18. There is no clean slate. The divide continues, and if anything, it grows deeper. Many students from private schools arrive armed with boundless ambition and unshakable confidence. Now, of course, there will be the counterexamples. There will be a few state-educated pupils who take to Oxford like a fish to water, but as it stands, they will be the exception and not the rule. And when these few individuals do succeed, they will be judged overwhelmingly on how well they are able to assimilate themselves into a culture overwhelmingly shaped by a private education. They will find it far easier to get ahead by becoming part of the private school culture which Oxford and Cambridge foster rather than rejecting. Through this, we accept this culture as inherently valuable and is inherently superior. But it's not. The system is broken. Like my voice. It leaves many exceptional and gifted students at Oxford not with unshakable confidence, but with an unshakable imposter syndrome. When they got in, they thought they'd overcome the hardest part of coming to Oxford, and that was getting a place. In fact, they arrived to find an alien environment, unwelcoming and unaccommodating. Why should it be that politics, law, medicine, journalism, and the top ranks of the army are all dominated by the same private school culture? A culture, that is, that makes those of us that haven't fallen into the lucky 7% uncomfortable and embarrassed because, for most of us, our school doesn't form the largest part of our identity. So why do we not see protests, riots on the streets? Why is the education debate in this country so repetitive and so uninspired? Why have we as a nation persuaded ourselves that the abolition of private schools is a fringe movement for the Marxists and for the radicals? Now, the schools themselves must be applauded for their durability, confident in their ability to mask the harm they exacerbate. Just look at any perspective. The schools portray themselves as national treasures in listed buildings across the nation, with young children dressed in picturesque uniforms and absorbed in wholesome extracurricular pursuits. Next, perhaps on the back page for the more conscientious parents, the mandatory discussion of the school's outreach work to local comprehensives. Some GCSE students conned into volunteering for their Duke of Edinburgh award, or a raft of bursaries generously offered to less advantaged pupils. but do not be deceived. This argument, offered by private schools on behalf of private schools, the argument from charity, frames real change out of the debate because it uses the conclusion to justify its premises. It asks only how we can improve access to these elitist institutions, but it does not question their existence itself, the existence of an education split both in terms of quality and of culture. So long as we continue to divide our children, we cannot help but maintain a divide which distributes its social privileges and its public costs unfairly. Now, to illustrate this unfairness, and to close my argument tonight, I want all of you, for a moment, to imagine that you are not yourselves. You are just a rational individual hidden behind a veil of ignorance. And in a few minutes, we are going to randomly distribute all of you across the British population. No longer will you be Oxford undergraduates, but a representative cross-sample of the nation. You could be anyone, rich, poor, northern, southern, able, disabled. You simply do not know. But before this happens, and before I tell you your identities, you have a chance to think about the British education system and about your children. Imagine what you would think if you were told that your son, your daughter, could not have an equal start in life because you worked for a charity, or because you've been in an accident, or because many years ago your own school had failed you. Would you be happy if every time you drove your child to the local comprehensive, you knew that just a mile down the road was a private school with charity status siphoning off the best teachers, and that only they could afford the best provisions for your severely dyslexic child, and that only they could give that child the advantage you know they deserve in life? Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you have a choice. Tonight you can insist that the importance our society places in education is not just idle rhetoric, nor an empty promise never to be fulfilled. It is instead a fundamental principle of any free and fair society. Private schools can only prosper at the expense of a state education. Their mere existence creates a parallel education system, a two-tiered approach to schools, and privileges the culture fostered by one over the other, from the cradle to the grave. Ladies and gentlemen, do not fall for the sweet nothings whispered by the private sector tonight, but vote instead for a future in which every child has a fair start in life, and vote with the proposition tonight. Thank you.